Hello, this is Mark Tooley, president of the Institute on Religion and Democracy here in Washington, D.C., speaking from my downtown office, looking out on 15th Street on a warm June afternoon with the pleasure of speaking with a friend in Europe across the waters, Jacob Rudenstrand of the Evangelical Alliance of Sweden, who has published a new book called The First Right, Freedom to Religion, Freedom from Religion. Jacob, why have you written this book?
Thank you for having me, and great to hear about the nice weather in DC. Here in Stockholm, we it's at 10 p.m. in the night, warm June day, but we look forward to a sunny day tomorrow. The reason for writing this book is actually the book right now in English is a translation of my book in Swedish that was published in 2022, which was published on the year of the 70-year anniversary of the Religious Freedom Act in Sweden. Compared to the United States, Sweden has a very short history of religious freedom. It was only in New Year's Day, 1952, when we first got a complete religious freedom, when every Swede was allowed to leave the Church of Sweden, which was a state church back then, without going into another denomination which was approved by the state. You could also hold public office without being a member of the Swedish Lutheran Church. And since then, Sweden has in a very short time gone from a Lutheran state ideology to more of a secular progressive state ideology, where religious freedom is more or less considered to be the least important human right in the world. A couple of years ago, I think it was in 2020 or 2022, Pew Research Forum did a survey across different nations, the United States and several countries in Europe, where Sweden being one of them, and where they tried to survey how the population viewed different democratic principles and rights, among them being fair judiciary, multiple party system, free society, and so on, and freedom of expression and equality. The highest rate in Sweden was equality, and we love equality, being the most, because hearing us being the most equal country in the world. Compared to this 93, 96%, only 53% of the Swedes viewed religious freedom as a very important right. It received the lowest rating among Swedes, and this taps into a sentiment that many of us in the Evangelical Alliance and many of us that is engaged with issues concerning religious freedom, that religious freedom is not an important issue. You're supposed to keep your faith private. You're supposed not to talk about the religion. And if you have religious conservative views, as many evangelicals in Sweden have, you're supposed to have them private, or you're supposed to evolve from them and discover the new progressive values and secular values of the rest of society eventually.
What percentage of Swedes are religiously practicing?
I haven't seen the latest numbers, but around uh, uh, around 2% or something like that. We're a country where, as I mentioned, we have a former state church and still people that is alive. The church was separated from the state in the year 2000, or and that meant that you weren't born automatically in as a member of the Swedish Lutheran Church, but still it has around five or 4.5 million members. But the majority of the members are not church going normally. So evangelical Christians in Sweden would be around 100,000 or something like that.
And Sweden has what, 10 million people?
Yeah, yeah.
So about 40% are still Lutheran, at least on paper.
Yeah, on paper, and uh, but they could be just practicing Christians, atheists, agnostics. They are even some Muslims that have become members of the Lutheran Church, and uh, it is just being as a vestige of tradition in Sweden.
And what percentage of Sweden is Muslim?
Um, Around the same, I think the same number as evangelicals have a Muslim background. That doesn't mean that everyone is a practicing Muslim, but from a Muslim tradition, Muslim country. They celebrate Ramadan, but not everyone are serious about their faith.
So about 1% of the population.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I could be wrong again, but that's the gist of it. I think.
And there's a lot of conversation about a supposed increase in religious activity in America, in Britain, maybe in other parts of Europe. Is there any sign of any kind of comeback for religion in Sweden?
Yeah, just the other year, one of our major survey institutes called the Youth Barometer actually called Jesus as being the influencer of the year 2025, which because they see a rising activity among young people to being more curious about Jesus, and this of course has several reasons for it, with an increase of globalization, of immigration. People in Sweden are trying to discover where do their roots come from, whereas many of their friends that they grew up with come from a Muslim background. At the same time, many young members of this Lutheran Church go through something called confirmation classes when they are around 14 or 15 years old, and many of them want to be more serious about their faith, not and ask deeper and harder questions from the priests. Many times they've gotten uh, answers that are very shallow, and many of the young people want to have more serious conversation about their faith. And also because social media, with rising part of many influencers, many from the States, they that create curiosity when it comes to the Christian faith, and because of that, many young people are trying to investigate more what it means to be a Christian. So
And what are
many secular newspapers have actually written a lot about this phenomenon.
among young people?
Yeah, among young people, going to church, being more serious about their faith, and so on.
And what are the major challenges to religious freedom in Sweden right now?
I would say that there are a number of them. One of them being overreaching the state, with the principal challenge of that the state are interested in, of course, limiting the rise of radical Islam, and because we in Sweden, compared to the United States, have something called government grants to religious bodies. You have tax deductible gifts, and we have because of our high percentage of taxation, that where the state collects taxes and go give out grants to different civil society bodies, with many of them being churches and other religious denominations. And the state is, of course, interested that these grants don't go to anti-democratic and radical elements. And with that being that they try to formulate what they call democratic criteria, among them being that you cannot discriminate against anyone. You have to stand by equal human equality and equal human rights and so on. And we all know that these terms are very fluid. They mean different things to different people. And because of our state authorities, they can overinterpret them. Because if you, as a conservative, as a Catholic body or an evangelical body, that you believe the marriage is only between one man and one woman, and that's God's design for marriage, that could be viewed by some organizations or some bodies as a discrimination against homosexuals and same-sex couples, and because of that, that could jeopardize whether and how you interpreted the Bible could also jeopardize an entire denomination's grant system. And of course, there are also other challenges in Sweden. Recently, we probably heard about when we had our NATO bid a couple of years ago, the Quran burnings, where several Muslim countries put pressure on Sweden to introduce a new form of blasphemy law, that you couldn't say something negative or burn personal copies of the Quran. I would say that there are two ditches when it comes to the understanding of religious freedom. One being that religious freedom being that society should be free from religion, and make it a public square that religious freedom is interpreted in that way by many of our secularist friends. And among many of our new Swedes, Muslim friends, religious freedom is sometimes interpreted as freedom from being hurt, your freedom from having your religious feelings being hurt. And that is two misunderstandings when it comes to religious freedom. And that's how, when I look at around the landscape of Sweden and the conversation around religious issues, and one major issue is also the issue of faith schools or religious schools in Sweden, where you as a church or a religious body can own the school and run the school based, of course, on how the law should be interpreted. But many of our different parties, they want to outlaw religious schools, faith schools, because of accusations of radicalism and extremism in many of our Muslim schools in Sweden. And because of that, many Christian schools are being targeted as well when it comes to investigations in these issues.
Christian schools are being investigated for extremism.
Yeah, they are investigated for, of course, the politicians are often very not investigated for extremism, but they are accused broadly, religious schools, for extremism. But everyone knows when it comes to accusations of extremism, the politicians, they mean the Muslim schools, but with the fear of sounding discriminatory against specifically Muslim schools, they have to include all religious schools in their political statements.
And Sweden has hate speech laws. Does that affect religious freedom?
That is correct. The hate speech laws were introduced after abolition of our last blasphemy law, which was abolished in 1970. So up until then, you couldn't say true religious freedom when it comes to criticizing different religions were very limited. And after 1970, and because of the European history when it comes to anti-Semitism and the Holocaust, the hate speech laws, which is broadly called incitement to hatred, has been gradually expanded to include different variations of interpretations. So in the year, I think it was in the year 2000, even a sexual identity were introduced into our hate speech laws. And because of that, you also had the Aker Green case, which was very well known internationally. And because one phrase in the hate speech law is included, showing contempt. The Swedish word is missaktning, which means in English showing contempt to anyone based on gender, ethnic background, and so on, a sexual minority. And this word, as we all know, showing contempt, can also be broadly defined, and not everyone doesn't like to be to receive contempt from anyone. But how do you ask the state to limit showing contempt? And And how can you define that? Because if you also define criticism of a religious conviction, such as Sharia, for example, that could also be labeled as contempt, or showing or saying that God's design between for marriage should be between one man and one woman. Uh, that could also be defined on as contempt, depending on who listens and so on. So, but of course we have our judiciary, which is very strong, but of course the part of the process against when it comes to the hate speech laws is also the process of litigation. You have probably heard of the Finnish Päivi Räsänen case, the Finnish parliamentarian, which was convicted to or brought before the courts in Finland. We have similar cases where individuals have been brought before the courts and have had to endure long procedures when it comes to litigation, and even that is punishment enough for many Swedes to go through.
And then finally, are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future of religious freedom in Sweden and in Europe overall?
Um, I'm a bit ambivalent when it comes to religious freedom in overall when it comes to the development, because as we all know, with these different trends going on, it could go either way, because the temptation when it comes to an increase in extremism in society would be that the state answers back with increased repression and go in a very drastic way against religious minorities, where when they try to curb radical elements, they also target many of us that are more constructive elements. And also when it comes to the increase of converts that we have in Sweden from Muslim background, my heart really goes out to them, because many of them are also many times misunderstood by the state, but also targeted by many of their former believers when they come from Muslim background, and not seldom they are being threatened. And but I'm also as a Christian that ultimately believe in what Jesus has said, that he will be with us to the end of days. That gives me hope as well.
Jacob Rudenstrand, author of The First Right, Freedom to Religion, Freedom from Religion. Thank you for this conversation.
Thank you.